Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? Geoff Mosher and Adam Caplan here. And not only is Inside the Birds back, but we've got a treat for our listeners as we're going to start a 4-part podcast series examining the entire NFC East with the help of a very familiar friend, and that is NFL Films senior producer and co-host of the NFL Matchup Show on ESPN, Greg Cosell. So we're going to bring in Greg, and we'll start off with Washington, and then we'll do the Giants. Actually, we'll start off with the Giants, then we'll do Washington, then we're going to do the Dallas Cowboys, and finish it off with the Philadelphia Eagles in a nice little 4-part series. So I'm pretty excited about that. Adam, I know you're kind of pumped up and ready to go, right?
I'm chomping at the bit, man. I've talked to Greg a lot the last couple of weeks, and he has watched a lot more tape than he normally would. So he's got a little bit more time because what we're all dealing with, we've got a little bit of downtime, my friend. So this is the perfect time, Geoff, to get Greg involved, and we really appreciate his time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll bring him in a second. First, I just want to remind everybody about the Inside the Birds YouTube page. We have amazing interviews with Trey Thomas, Joe Banner, even Greg Cosell from Around the Draft. Great player breakdowns. So check out Inside the Birds on YouTube, and please become a subscriber. And you can also get our daily ITB radio segments that we do with 97.3 ESPN in South Jersey. They're usually up at 5 o'clock. You can hear our interviews. It's me, Adam, and Andrew DeCecco from InsideTheBirds.com. We do it on an alternating basis. And speaking of InsideTheBirds.com, got fresh new content up there. Adam has put up his latest NFL notebook. I've got a story about the death of the running back by committee on the Eagles. It's now the Miles Sanders show.
Are you sure about that? Are you sure about that?
I'm pretty sure. I'm going to go ahead and say, despite what we've heard, the RBC is a thing of the past. And we've got some stories also by Andrew DeCecco, who's doing his own NFC East outlook. And, Andrew's so good at the draft, and he knows a lot of these young upcoming players on the rise for these teams that we don't talk about. So make sure you're checking out his work on our website. Before we get to Greg Cosell, though, Adam, support for Inside the Birds is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-belt grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels.
Yes, save them. Save those jewels, man.
Got to save the jewels. They obsess over their technology developments to provide you the best tools for your grooming experience. All right. So, listen, we all got to do it, and we all know it's uncomfortable and can be very uneasy, and I'm kind of trimming around that area, but that's why Manscaped has redesigned the electric trimmer. The Manscaped engineering team spent 18 months perfecting the greatest ball hair trimmer ever created, and just released the new and improved Lawn Mower 3.0. Their third-generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce manscaping accidents. Don't want to have any of those. Millions of balls are about to be nick-free thanks to Manscaped's advanced skin-safe technology. Manscaping accidents are finally a thing of the past. And when I tell you this is premium, I mean premium. The battery lasts up to 90 minutes, people, so you can take a longer shave, and the water-resistant technology allows you to groom in the shower.
Oh, I love that. One of the coolest features, Geoff, is the LED light, which illuminates grooming areas for a closer and more precise trimming. Always want to be precise when you're down there. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
They've also upgraded to a 7,000 RPM motor with quiet stroke technology, which, by the way, is trademark. Yeah. You got it. Yeah, you don't want to be real loud down there. You don't want to wake anyone up. But let's not forget about the charging stand. Show your mower off loud and proud, because this intelligently designed stand is a convenient charging dock powered by USB. Always got to have that USB port, folks. But it's got the quiet stroke technology. We love that. But look, if you're listening to me right now, I want you to experience it firsthand for yourself. Trim that junk ears, folks. Come on now. Come on, guys. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code ITB at manscaped.com. Your gazintas. Well, thank you.
My gazintas thank me all the time. So get 20% off.
Wait a minute. Do they actually talk to you? Wait a minute. Is that true? Do they talk to you?
Nobody wants to hear about my conversation with my gazintas. All they want to know is that you get 20% off and free shipping with code ITB at manscaped.com. 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use that code ITB. And before we lose any listeners or threaten our credibility any further,
that.
let us bring in the great Greg Cosell. Well, as promised, we bring back a fan favorite of Inside the Birds and its listeners, and that's Greg Cosell. You know him from NFL Film Senior Producer and, of course, ESPN's NFL Matchup Show. What's going on, Greg?
Geoff, what's shaking, my friend?
Just a little football in the offseason. As I know you've been watching a lot of tape. Adam and I have been talking football, just kind of almost trying to, speak it back into existence. I think you can help us do that.
Well, we'll do our best. Fortunately, I've been watching a ton of tape, so we'll see if I can remember anything.
Well, we're going to ask you a lot about the Giants today. That's going to be the first part of our 4-part NFC East outlook preview, whatever you'd like to call it. And we're going to get into their new coaching staff, new schemes, new personnel, some of the guys they brought back from last year who are young. I think what I want to start off with asking you, the Joe Judge hire was so interesting. I mean, it was not a name that a lot of people felt going into the offseason was going to be, a head coach. He kind of came out of nowhere. What do you know now more about Joe Judge that you may not have known at this time of the year, and how will that impact the Giants?
Absolutely nothing. No, I mean that. I mean that honestly. I mean, I think you have to look past Joe Judge at the coordinators, to be honest. I don't know a lot about Joe Judge other than just seeing on a sheet of paper what his background is. Never met him, didn't really know much about him as a coach on the Patriot staff. So I can't really answer that with any real sense of intelligence. So I think you've got to look at their two coordinators, and they'll give you, I think, a better example, a better sense anyway of what the Giants will likely to be.
So Greg, let's start with the coordinators. And Jason Garrett's obviously a guy that you've seen his offense before.
Oh yeah.
Who he learned under the great Ernie Sampisi and obviously North Turner and that kind of scheme. Now he's going to coach Daniel Jones. I know for our friends at fantasypoints.com, you actually have graded or actually looked at the tape of Daniel Jones from last season as a rookie. What did you see? And if you can, talk about Jason Garrett and how he can coach Daniel Jones.
Well, I think that Jason Garrett will take the approach, and you mentioned his background, and that's really, really important because when all's said and done, coaches coach what they know. Even guys who've been coaching a long time, they have certain beliefs that they've learned from mentors, and they coach what they know. So I think you'll see the Giants start with the run game. They clearly have one of the top 2 or 3 backs in the league in Saquon Barkley. And for the purposes of this discussion, we'll assume health of all these players. So you have to believe that Barkley gets 270 to 300 carries. He'll be the starting point of the offense. But what is a pass game like with Jason Garrett and with his background? That background is one of play action. And I think that Daniel Jones, and I studied his tape quite a bit. Actually, I did it about a week ago. I looked at a ton of games and a ton of plays. And he was very, very good in the play action game in terms of snapping his head around. A lot of people just assume, play action, anybody can do it. Play action is a detailed, nuanced element of the pass game. And a lot of quarterbacks who are not used to playing under center struggle with the play action pass game because there's detail involved. You've got to fake the handoff. Everybody think of Peyton Manning, how quickly he snapped his head around. That's a learned trait, because the defense is not in the same place when you snap your head around as it was before you turned your back. So this is a learned trait, but I thought he did that well. And overall, I thought Jones possessed a lot of positive traits. The one issue with Jones, and reasonable people will disagree with this, or will have different points of view, is he's not a big-armed guy. He's much more of to me, a pace and touch thrower than a drive the ball thrower. I thought he had a really good feel for throwing against zone. He had a great feel for voids. He attacked man-to-man coverage. He's got second reaction ability. I think there's a lot to like about Daniel Jones. And assuming health, guys, they have a lot of weapons. I don't think people think in those terms, but I also studied Darius Slayton. They've got a lot of dimensions in this pass game. Slayton can run. If Ingram can stay on the field, boy, is he an explosive athlete. And then they've got Sterling Shepard, who I think is a really good slot, and I think that's what he should be. So this is not a team bereft of weapons at all. They've got some weapons.
Greg, when I read your breakdown of Daniel Jones and what you liked about him And it did seem like you were positive on him, at least his development, his mobility, his pocket awareness. And then
Yep.
you also mentioned that he doesn't necessarily always look to drive the ball. I felt like I was reading maybe a scouting report on an Alex Smith-like quarterback. I don't love to do the prospect reflection all the time, but that's what came to my mind when I was reading that. Is that something that you can see a similarity?
I think he's got a better arm than Alex Smith. And I think he's a little more aggressive throwing the ball. I had always felt that Alex Smith was a cautious thrower of the football. And I think Alex Smith was a better runner than Jones. Jones has good second reaction abilities, by no means a statue. But I think that Alex Smith was a better runner than Jones. Although Jones in college, when you go back to his tape at Duke, they ran a lot of design runs, and he was effective doing that. But I don't know if that's his game in the NFL. And I'm not sure that'll be a featured part of their offense. Look, everybody runs zone reads on occasion now. Everybody has a quarterback run here and there, depending on down and distance and situation. But Jones is not a runner per se. So I think his arm's better than Alex Smith's. It's just not a power arm, but I think he can make throws, and he's willing to make throws. He attacks man coverage, and I always view that as a positive and critical in the NFL, because you're seeing more and more man coverage for many different reasons. And quarterbacks have to attack man coverage. They can't be shy about turning it loose.
Greg, let's get back to Darius Slayton. And here's a guy, a fifth-round pick, who I don't want to say came out of nowhere, but not much was expected out of him. He absolutely torched the Eagles. He just ran by them repeatedly. He also had a game, I believe, against the Jets where he had like 10 catches. So What did his tape look like from last season to you?
Yeah, I liked his tape. And again, I watched him during the season, but what's so much fun about doing this is in the off season is you can watch a guy back to back to back to back, and you can watch, 150 plays in a row. I thought Slayton was a little more advanced and refined than he might have been given credit for. To me, the tape showed that he had a pretty good idea and a plan to attack and defeat press man coverage. He has really good short area quickness. He's clearly a vertical dimension. He went up and attacked the football. He's very good on slant routes. And I think that's something that in this era of the shorter passing games, you catch a slant, and he did that against the Jets. You mentioned the Jet game. He caught a slant. It might have been a fourth down play. I can't remember. And he took it to the house. I thought he showed enough route running savvy besides the vertical dimension speed element to lead me to believe that he's going to be a good player. Now, I don't know if he'll ever be a high volume guy for those listening who are big fantasy guys. I don't know if he'll catch 85 or 90 balls, but I think he presents a vertical dimension. And you guys both know when you have that guy, hey, just think of our local team, the Eagles. When you have that guy versus when you don't have that guy, I mean, it changes the way defenses play you, and he can run.
It's still just amazing to me that Darius Slayton is going to be covered by Darius Slay when the Eagles play. That's just one of those random coincidences that sticks out. Yeah, you would think so. Sticking with the wide receivers, Greg, I thought it was very interesting last year when the Giants signed Golden Tate. They already had Sterling Shepard. Both of them, by nature, seem to be interior wide receivers. You don't see a lot of teams with two guys who play. And the Eagles kind of felt that pinch 2 years ago when they tried to sandwich Nelson Aguilar and Golden Tate on the field at the same time. What did you see in usage last year, and do you think this is something that can work?
Well, that's the one issue that they face is the fact that Tate is also at his best in the slot. Shepard lined up outside last year. Tate lined up outside last year. So they don't necessarily have the one guy on the outside opposite Slayton who's necessarily kind of that volume wideout. Because I'm just not sure, as much as I like Slayton, I'm not sure if he's the guy. Now, I did make a point in my notes that I was wondering under Jason Garrett, and this is just speculation. I was wondering under Jason Garrett if Slayton could become the X like Michael Gallup was in Dallas this year. And I'm not, he could be. I'm not sure. There's no answer to that at this point. Mm-hmm. But Tate will probably have to line up on the outside because, quite honestly, when you look at the Giants' roster right now, there's really not another guy that you look at and say, hey, he's the outside receiver opposite Slayton. And with no off season, we have no idea what's going on the field. So, because there is no field. So I don't know, that would be one area in which they could struggle. But the key to me, the wild card in all this, is Evan Ingram. He cannot stay healthy because Evan Ingram can line up, split from the formation. Teams now are very big on what we call 1-by-3 sets. It's where the single receiver is a tight end. And Ingram is that guy. Ingram is explosive. He's dynamic. When he catches the ball on the move, he's a wide receiver. He had about a 75-yard touchdown against the Bucs last year, where if you didn't know who it was, you would absolutely have said that was a wide receiver. So he just can't stay on the field. But if he can stay on the field, he gives them a ton of versatility.
Greg, the one thing they did address, which has been a problem, it still might be a problem, but they've addressed it. They addressed the offensive line with Andrew Thomas, Matt Pert in the third round, and Lemieux on the fifth. Andrew Thomas is a guy from Georgia, obviously coming from a good conference. What do you know about him, and how good of a right tackle could he be for them?
I like Andrew Thomas's tape quite a bit. I thought he was really an efficient player. Now, he played right tackle early in his career at Georgia and then left tackle the last 2 years. And I have to tell you, in watching all this tape, because I watched a ton of Slayton and a ton of Jones, I thought one thing that really stuck out was that Nate Solder was not very good last year. Now, I assume he's still their left tackle. Andrew Thomas will eventually be their left tackle. I assume this year Solder will still be the left tackle and Thomas will be the right tackle. Yeah. But Thomas is an execution efficient player, both in the run game and in pass protection. He struck me as the kind of player, it's always hard to say a guy's going to be an all-pro, but he struck me as the kind of player that you could line up and tackle, and for 10 years, you'll have no issues. He's that kind of guy. Whether he's a top 3 tackle in the league, who can say? But you won't have a problem with him as your right tackle.
So to get back real quick, Greg, to what you said about the wide receivers, because I'm thinking from an Eagles perspective here, where if Avonte Maddox winds up being the starter opposite Darius Slay, we felt that while we like him, that he will give up inches on a lot of wide receivers in this league who are bigger and physical. But if the Giants have to play Golden Tate on the outside because they're playing Shepard on the inside, that to me seems like a matchup where it's not that Golden Tate's any lesser of a player. He's still a very good player. But if I'm Avonte Maddox, now I'm looking at someone in my height range. I can study them a little bit. I may have a better shot than, say, if I'm facing someone 6'2".
Yeah, and obviously Tate's not an explosive burner. Tate's a physical guy. He's tough. He's competitive. He's good run after catch. He's always been built like a running back. But you don't necessarily have to worry about Tate running by you. Then it gets to scheme and how the Giants will scheme. Slayton would be the concern because Slayton can run by people. Well, we don't know about the Eagles, and obviously we'll get to them, another time. We don't know now that they have Darius Slay if Jim Schwartz will play more man coverage, what his foundation will be. Jim has been a guy who's played both man and zone, and the percentage of each one is often dependent on the opponent. We don't know if he'll increase the man percentage because of Darius Slay. Darius Slay has been utilized as a pure man shutdown type corner. The Lions last year, where he came from, played more man than any team in the league, I believe, other than New England, in terms of man-to-man percentage. And Slay matched up against the opponent's best receiver almost every week. And when you do that, and on a team like the Lions that had zero pass rush, Slay got burned on occasion, because a lot of people, look at stats, analytics. So Slay got burned. But if you watch the tape, you see that the Lions had zero pass rush. And it's really hard to play man-to-man and not get burned if there's no pass rush.
Greg, one thing I want to talk about Slayton, since we're Darius Slay, which we're talking about Eagles defense. Schwartz, correct me if I'm wrong, when he plays man, the corners don't travel. They stay sides. I believe they do, right?
That's what he's done the past couple of years, but he hasn't had a big-time man-to-man corner.
The hope is obviously that Darius Slay would travel, because if you're going against the Giants and Darius Slayton, who could flat out run, who's also taller, and by the way, Darius Slay has some size, you would hope that the one thing that you could stick him man-to-man, and that's what you're paying him this big-time money for. And I would expect that matchup to happen. So Geoff, let's talk about the defense. What do we got there?
Well, real quick, I wanted to ask Greg one more thing on because he mentioned Jason Garrett, and now he's in a different environment with different personnel. Greg, and if memory serves me correct, Garrett did like to play two tight end, that 12 personnel package to spring the run and get Ezekiel going. But when you look at the Giants personnel, you mentioned Evan Ingram, explosive tight end, not necessarily a blocking tight end. If he wants to kind of protect Daniel Jones and groom him along and get that running game going, does he have the personnel at tight end, blocking tight end, to be able to put those 12 personnel packages on the field?
Yeah, I think they do. Again, we don't know who the second tight end will be. It will likely be Caden Smith, and he came from Stanford. And Stanford is a school that lines up and plays old school, what would be viewed today as old school football, where they line up, they run the ball, base personnel, base formations. So Caden Smith has that background, and he actually performed well down the stretch last year when Ingram got hurt. They've also got a couple of other tight ends on the roster who can line up and block. And again, we don't know who'll make the roster, but they've got Levine Tololo, they've got Eric Tomlinson, both guys who have shown the ability to line up in line and block to some degree. So they do have the ability to line up in two tight end sets and run the ball. Now they also have a fullback on their roster. And the Cowboys under Jason Garrett have used a fullback in the past as well. So they have Elijah Penny, who's still on the roster. And the fullback has sort of become a little more back in vogue in the NFL. If you look at last season, and a lot of teams are going to study Kyle Shanahan's offense hard to see how he uses the fullback. Now, Elijah Penny is not Kyle Juszczyk, but still the use of 21 personnel with two backs, one being a fullback, is something I'm sure a lot of teams are studying hard in the NFL because of the success of Kyle Shanahan with the 49ers. And don't forget, Kyle Shanahan took the Falcons to the Super Bowl as their offensive coordinator. So that offense clearly works in the NFL.
Yeah, this is going to look like a different offense than the Pat Shurmur offense and the Ben McAdoo.
Without question.
Teams.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, we are going to talk about the Giants defense and go through some of their personnel, their new additions. We'll talk about how that impacts the Eagles offense. First, I want to stop and say thanks to our friends at PHLSportsNation.com, always enhancing the fan experience with their coverage of all four Philadelphia major teams. They do great podcasts. They do put great content on their website. So make sure you're checking out PHLSportsNation.com. And we'll also stop here and get a word from our great sponsors. Okay, Greg, we're going to go through this Giants defense. And, as praiseworthy as you were for some of the offensive weaponry that they have, I feel like we're going to be singing a little bit of a different tune here for their defensive construct.
Well, again, you have to look at the coordinator now. It's Patrick Graham. And right. Patrick Graham, not only is he a graduate of Yale, so let's assume he's a pretty smart guy, but he also was on the New England Patriots coaching staff for, I think, 7 years. So he has a bit of the Bill Belichick background, and then obviously he was Miami's defensive coordinator of the Dolphins last year with Brian Flores. So it was another year, with the Bill Belichick approach. So I think when you look at that approach, you look at players that are viewed as versatile, and that's kind of the way the Bill Belichick tree is you're looking for versatility in your players. Now, we can debate about the quality of their players. In an ideal world, Leonard Williams, who's never quite become the sack artist that I think many thought he would, but he's a player that can line up in multiple positions along your defensive front. I think that they probably see Lorenzo Carter ultimately as a guy that you can move around quite a bit, and they hope that he can become more of a force as a pass rusher. Inside, and this has always been a Bill Belichick thing. You could go back to when Bill Belichick, back to the early 2000s when he had huge interior D tackles. He had Richard Seymour. He had Ted Washington one year, guys who had a hard time moving. They have Dalvin Tomlinson and Dexter Lawrence. That's a good starting point inside. Those guys are hard to move, and Dexter Lawrence, for a big man, is extremely athletic. Obviously, they wanted to try to upgrade the linebacker position. They signed Blake Martinez. Nice player, not a stud, but a nice player, an upgrade for the Giants. The big question for the Giants will be at corner. Let's assume DeAndre Baker plays. We have no idea how his issue might play out. DeAndre Baker struggled a ton as a rookie corner last year, but his college tape was very good. I thought his college tape reminded me somewhat of Tre'Davious White. I thought last year you could tell that he lacked confidence. He got beat early in the season, and I'm not sure he really rebounded from that, but he's got ability. At the other corner, they signed James Bradbury. He's a very solid NFL corner. Maybe not top echelon, but he can play man. He can play zone. He's matched up as a shutdown corner in his former division, playing in the AFC South. I can remember matchups of him against Julio Jones. He more than held his own. So Bradbury's an upgrade for them, and he's a big physical corner. They drafted Xavier McKinney, a player I really liked and who fits sort of that multi-dimensional position player in today's NFL. He can play the slot, he can play safety, you can put him in the box. If you look at Patrick Graham, the coordinator, and you think about his background with the Patriots, you're probably going to see a lot of 6 defensive backs in there as their sub. And that's where a guy like, to me, Xavier McKinney would really shine.
Greg, Marcus Golden's a guy who's unsigned, who's one of their best pass rushers. If they don't sign him back, I wonder where they're going to get pass rushers. And I know that they scheme it up. They did bring Kyler. Right. I know they brought in Kyler Fackrell from the Packers.
Yeah.
I believe there's a coach on their staff who coached with the Packers. So that's why Fackrell and Martinez is there. But Jimenez, the kid, O'Shane Jimenez, from he was a 3rd-round pick last year. I don't know how much.
What kind of factor I was going to mention?
Yeah. What kind of factor could he be for them?
I think you're hoping he can develop into a pass rusher. That's what he was drafted to be. He was a 3rd-round pick, so that's not a throwaway pick by any means. So I think they're hoping that he can provide some edge pass rush. But, you make a really good point. I mean, I think that they'll try to move people around. They'll even someone like Fackrell, when I think back to how he was used in Green Bay under Mike Pettin. Mike Pettin's another guy that moves people around a lot. So Fackrell has experience not only playing on the edge, but rushing the quarterback kind of from the joker position where you move around. So I think they have to try to orchestrate pass rush, and we'll see how that plays out. In an ideal world, see, one of the things about the Patriots, a team like that, is they can line up and play really good man coverage. So we don't know if the Giants can do that. And if they can't do that, the thing about orchestrating pass rush is it becomes scheme. So you're counting on beating the pass protection schematically as opposed to with matchups. And that can work if you can cover. There's a lot of talk now in the NFL, and reasonable people debate this as well. It was often believed for 100 years that pass rush was more important than coverage. There's a lot of smart people now who believe that coverage and the ability to play really good man coverage now is more important than pass rush in a league in which there's so much quick game and the ball comes out so fast.
Greg, this is the kind of team right here, the Giants, that when we talk about the lost mini camps and who knows what training camp will look like, they have a new defensive coordinator along with the head coach. So they have a new scheme. And not just that, they've got, as you mentioned, they have a new corner, they have a new safety, they have a new inside linebacker, a new pass rushing linebacker. Leonard Williams just got over at the end of last year, but he's got to adjust now too. So this is the type of team that I think gets most affected by the lack of camps.
I would agree 1,000%. Because I think someone like Joe Judge, when you understand his background and without knowing the man personally, I think his background tells you that he's about the work and the effort and the commitment. And as wonderful for all these teams as virtual learning might be, it's not the same. And it's not the same as being face-to-face with your players, as getting to know what motivates them, what drives them, what allows them to be at their best. And so it'll be interesting. Obviously, the Giants' defense a year ago was not very good. They've tried to address it through free agency, through the draft. They did draft a corner in the 4th round out of UCLA named Darnay Holmes, who was actually the top-rated corner coming out of high school in America. And he got hurt his last year at UCLA, but if you go back to the year prior, 2018, he matched up man to man all over the field to Hollywood Brown when they played Oklahoma. And he did a terrific job against Hollywood Brown. Now, I think because of his size, he'll be a slot corner. And he could end up winning the starting slot corner job for the Giants because they didn't really have a slot corner last year, or a good one. And so they're going to be better on defense just with an infusion of better personnel. And I think the way Patrick Graham will probably utilize that personnel.
One follow-up, Greg, before we move on. When you talk about the Giants' defense from last season, was it an execution issue, scheme issue, personnel issue, all three? Because there were some weeks, quite frankly, talking to teams that went up against the Giants, they were not competitive defensively some weeks. So what kind of happened as an overview from watching it?
Oh, that's always a tough thing to answer. I mean, because, you can try to get a feel for the schemes, obviously, watching tape. It was James Betcher, who tends to be a big believer in pressure.
Yeah.
I don't think their corner play was very good at all last year. I don't think their secondary play was very good at all. I thought their linebacker play was spotty. So I don't think their talent was very good. And then you have to try to scheme around that because you can't just line up and play. And, if you can't get to the quarterback, it's really difficult. So it's probably a combination of all those things, but the talent level was just not very good.
Greg, if I can go back to James Bradbury with you, obviously their big cornerback signing, and you mentioned the priority they're putting there. If you go back and look at his career in Carolina, it's not like he was always mentioned among the better cornerbacks, but he clearly was. But is he someone who specializes more in a specific scheme, whether it's playing zone or man?
That's a good question, Geoff. See, the one reason I think he was not mentioned among the better corners is because for most of his career, not that he's old, but for most of his career, Carolina was a predominant zone-based defense. It's only more recently that they started to play more man, and he would be a matchup corner because he's got good size, good ability. Then Carolina started not to be as good a team the last couple of years, so he sort of got lost in the shuffle. But I think he can play both man and zone, and I think he can match up to quality wideouts. I think he's a good, solid NFL corner. Look, in an ideal world, Geoff, assuming DeAndre Baker plays and he was a first-round pick, I think they're hoping that Bradbury and Baker give them two quality corners. That remains to be seen with Baker, but I think that's what their hope is, that they're set at the corner position, on the outside anyway.
Right. And last thing, I just wanted to follow up on Leonard Williams. In watching him, he was such a high pick. I remember when he fell to the Jets and they ran to the podium to go take him because they didn't think he was going to be there. What happened there? I mean, what do you see from him that's just the light hasn't gone on and he hasn't become a fearsome, end/slash tackle?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I haven't studied the Jets defense as much as some other teams. So I can't really say, why he's not a great player. The physical traits are present, and he is a versatile player, and that he can line up in multiple positions. Certainly he has snaps where he's very disruptive, but I don't want to say really a whole lot more because I don't know and I don't want to be wrong. Look, one thing I've learned in all the work I've done over the years, particularly when I watch college players, interior D linemen stats can be very deceiving. So I don't want to sit here and say that he's not a really good player because he doesn't get 15 sacks, because I know when I study defensive tackles for my college work, I could look at a stat sheet and see that the tackle has one tackle in the game, and you go, he probably had a bad game, and then I put on the tape, and he's the most disruptive guy on the field. He just doesn't make the tackles. So I don't want to speak to Williams because I just haven't studied him personally enough to feel like I have a great feel for him. But
last season, though, no, I was just going to say, Greg, last season, though, talking to teams that graded his tape for free agency, obviously he's still there. It didn't seem like he had a good season. I was just wondering from your tape study, anything stood out to you from his tape?
I saw him more later in the season with the Giants, and nothing that really, like I said, I just. Gotcha. I didn't feel like I've seen him enough to know the answer to that. Maybe with a new coaching staff and new ways of trying to reach him, he can become the player that his talent and athletic level suggests he can be.
Good point.
All right, before we get out of here on the Giants, Greg, I'm just going to ask you to kind of put a little bow tie on it. We talked about the offense and the defense, a lot of newness here, and they went 4-12 last year. Clearly, they've added, but they've got some obstacles to overcome as well. How do you see this team, just overall now?
And like I said, let's assume health. I think they have a chance to be pretty solid offensively. I like Jones. I think he'll continue to improve. Clearly, if Barkley can play all 16 games, he's as dynamic a back as there is in the league, and he's a terrific receiver as well. I think offensively, they could be a little bit under the radar, but be very intriguing. Defensively, they'll be better than they were a year ago. I don't know if defense will be a strength in a strict sense, but I don't think. I guess my point would be I don't think that the Giants' offense will have to score 30 points a game just to compete. I think they'll be better defensively.
All right. That is the great Greg Cosell, again, from NFL Matchup on ESPN, and, of course, senior producer at NFL Films. We thank you, Greg. And, of course, next time we talk to you, we'll be previewing the Washington Redskins, another team that's got a lot of new players, new coaches, new schemes, and whatnot. Thanks again for joining us on Inside the Birds, Greg.
All right, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, remember, download the DraftKings Sportsbook and Casino app now and use promo code ITB to play risk-free up to $200 at casino games for your first 24 hours. That's promo code ITB to play risk-free up to $200 for your first 24 hours of casino play on DraftKings Sportsbook and Casino. Must be 21 or over, Pennsylvania only. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. And that is going to do it for Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles Intel. Big thanks again to Greg Cosell. He'll continue to help us preview the NFC East. Thanks to our producer, Hunter Brody. Check out Sports Talk with Broads on his YouTube page. Check out his podcast, Processed, with former Villanova basketball star Darrell Reynolds. And make sure you're checking out Hunter's work on Twitter, @Broads81. Thanks to our friends at 97.3 ESPN. Download the free mobile app. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the bird.